This lesson, I want us to start looking at how we can test LiveView uploads. LiveView uploads can be a little complex, and so we're going to split this into 3 lessons. The first one's going to take a look at how we upload images, look at the previews, cancel uploads, things like that. The second one is going to focus on how we actually test that we can store those images locally, so we're going to consider the direct-to-server approach. And then the third one, we're going to consider how do we upload those to an external location, what we call the direct-to-cloud approach. So let's go ahead and dive in. If you look at your router, you'll notice we have a couple of live views related to albums, the album live index and the album live show. If you go ahead and open up your browser and go to /albums, you'll notice that this is the index page, and here we can create a new album. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. We can input a name, say Hobbit Home, and then we can browse for pictures, and let's go ahead and add a few pictures. And as you can see, we have some validations. We have too many files, so that's one too many of the files. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the Elixir droplet. And of course, we're showing these photo previews, and as you can see, we could cancel them, right? So I'll go ahead and cancel these two as well. So we have some validations there. And finally, we have some validations on the name. So that's the first part we're going to be focusing. In the next lesson, we're going to focus what happens when we click on this upload and we actually test the submission. Let's go ahead and dive into our code. Go ahead and open up your album live index. And let's first take a look at the mount function. As you can imagine, we have a chain set for the form, and this is using an album chain set that's empty. And we're also allowing uploads, and we're calling our uploads photos. We accept JPEGs, PNGs, and we have a max entries of 2. And that's sort of an arbitrary restriction, but it allowed us to test that we have the too many files validation. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what we're rendering. When we render, we have this form. And as you can see, we have the ID is upload form. That's going to be important because we're going to target this form with that ID. And we have the Phoenix change, validate, and save. The form itself is not too complicated. We have an input for the name. So this is the album name that we talked about. And then we use the live file input from Phoenix LiveView, and it's doing all the heavy lifting for the uploads, and we pass in uploads photos. Then we have a submit button to upload the images. And again, this would trigger the Phoenix submit, which we'll look at in the next lesson. But since we have the live file input, we know that LiveView will be rendering those previews. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. As you can see, once we have those, we render this photo previews. And for each entry in the upload entries, we are rendering the live image preview. Once again, we're letting LiveView do the heavy lifting here. And as you may notice, we have a data role of image preview here on each live image preview. This is going to be important when we try to test and target these things. Then we pass the entry and put a little bit of classes there. Of course, sometimes we want to cancel these uploads, and that's where we have this button defined right up here. That's the X button at the top where we were canceling the upload, and you can see that there with a Phoenix click, and of course we have a data role as well for that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the handle events for validation and for canceling. Once again, we'll take a look at the saving next. So I'll go ahead and scroll down. When we validate, we grab the parameters, we pass them through the change set, and then we go ahead and put the action validate so that we actually trigger the validation. And then when we return that change set, re-render it. That's how we saw the error when we didn't include the name. And then if we want to cancel an upload, we use the Phoenix LiveView cancel upload helper that takes in the reference. And so we let LiveView do all the heavy lifting here. As you can see, we're also handling the save event. But like I said before, we're going to leave this for the next lesson because that has complexity on its own. So let's go ahead and see how we can test what we've seen so far. The uploading, the previews, the cancellation. Go ahead and open up album live index test. Let's go ahead and write our first test. And let's say that the user can see the preview of a picture to be uploaded. Taking the connection struct as usual. And now let's go ahead and mount our live view. We'll ignore the HTML. And we'll mount this at albums. Perfect. So what do we do next? Well, as you've probably guessing, we're going to grab our view, we're going to interact with some type of element, and then we're going to call a render function on it. And if you guessed that, that's awesome. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to grab the view. We're going to use a file input helper from Phoenix LiveViewTest. And that takes in the view. Then it takes a CSS selector to target something here. And here we're going to target our form. And then we're going to tell it that we're passing in the photos. These are the uploads that we're allowing, right? And this takes a list. So I'll do this, but then I'll open it. And each element of this list needs to have certain attributes. Now, the ones I will define are name, content, and type. There's other things we can do, and you can see all the options with the file input documentation, but for now, this will suffice. We're going to go ahead and upload an image called Moria Door, and the content is the file, and we actually have a file included. So if you go under Test Support Images, you'll see that we have an image there called Moria Door PNG. So that's what we're going to use. So we're going to go ahead and read this file. And then finally, the type is going to be image PNG. Finally, we want to perform some action on this file input we've targeted, and that's called render upload. The render upload takes the result of the file input and then the file name we're expecting to upload, and that's going to be Moria Door. And this optionally takes a percentage of the upload. So you could, for example, put in 50% here and then get some HTML here and assert that somewhere in that HTML we have, say, I don't know, 50% uploaded, right? If you're showing the progress of the upload. We're not going to do any of that, so we'll rely on the default, which is 100, but since this is a default, we don't need to use it, so I'll leave it out. And then finally, we want to make an assertion here. Now, what can we assert about the image preview? Testing images is a little bit tricky because it's not like we see some text on the screen. It's possible that we would have the file name somewhere in there, but we might be saving the file name in a different way, right? In many cases, we might transform this into use some UUID, which in fact we are using if you look at the implementation. And so it's not guaranteed that we're going to have that. So what I like to do is test by proxy. What I mean by that is we're going to assert that there's an element on the page, and if that element on the page is present, we are confident enough to know that the image is present. So how do we do that? We're going to go ahead and target an element. And we're going to pass a CSS selector with a data role of image preview. So if we have this data role, we're going to assume that the image has been correctly rendered. I'll go ahead and save this, and let me go ahead and open up the index LiveView, and let's take a look at where that image preview is found. And if you remember, that happens in this data role with the live image preview. So we're not guaranteed 100% that the image will be there, but if we see this data role there, we know that the image has been uploaded. At least there's enough confidence from a testing perspective. So I'll go back to the test, and I'll go ahead and run this test. Excellent. So it passes. Now, as we've done with other tests, I want to go ahead and delete some parts of the code so we can understand what this test is actually testing. So let's go back to the index LiveView, and let's see what it's testing. Let's first test that the image preview is actually being rendered. So what happens if I delete that element and run the test? Sure enough, we see that we don't find that element. So that's something our test is testing. But our test is also testing that the file input is present. So if we remove this live file input, we should see our test fail. Excellent. And that's because we can't do the render upload, right? So that's a really helpful failure mode. I'll go ahead and rerun the test just to make sure everything's back to normal, passing. Good. Now that we've done this, let's go ahead and see how we can cancel an upload. I'll go back to the test. So let's go ahead and write a test where the user can cancel the upload. Taking the connection struct as usual, and we'll actually copy this whole thing. Excellent. Now, in order to test that we can cancel an upload, we first have to make an upload. So we'll leave this just as it is. And then what we're going to do here is cancel the upload. And if we cancel the upload successfully, we should be able to refute that this element is present, right? Because if we upload it successfully, the element is present. If we cancel it, it should not be there. So we can refute this. Now, how do we cancel the upload? Hopefully this will seem familiar to you by now. We grab the view, we're going to target an element, and this we're going to do it by a data role here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what element we need to target. Index. So go back to the index, and let's go to the cancel upload. You'll see here that this button has a data role of cancel upload. So we'll target that. And we should be able to just render click on this button and cancel the upload. So let's go ahead and run this test. Excellent, it passes. So now we're testing that we can cancel the upload. Just to make sure we're testing things correctly, I'll go once again back in here, go back to that button, and make sure that if we delete the button, that test should now fail because we're unable to cancel this. Excellent. If you see it, if you look at the test failure, you'll see that we don't have that cancel upload element. So I'll go ahead and put that back. And you can also delete the Phoenix click, and you'll see that this test is also covering us for that. So if we have the button, but we don't have that Phoenix click, it'll show us that we don't have that Phoenix click attribute. Awesome. Now let's go back to the test. And before we move forward, I want to do a little bit of a refactoring. So our tests are getting quite verbose, and this is not easy to read for our coworkers. So why don't we go ahead and extract some of these functionality into nice helper functions. I'll go ahead and extract this into an upload function. That'll take the view and the file name. And I'll just go ahead and copy the whole thing. Because if you look at this, the only thing that's really varying here is the file name. So I'll go ahead and pass this file name. We'll interpolate it here. And finally, when we upload it, we'll pass it there. Now I'm going to do something else. Rather than returning the HTML that render upload returns, I'm going to return the view itself so that we can pipe into upload. So let's take a look at how that works. I'll go ahead and call this upload. We're going to pass the file name, and then we can pipe it directly into the other one. We go ahead and run this test to make sure it's passing and everything's good. Excellent. And now we can do the same thing with this. I'm going to go ahead and define a new helper function called cancel upload. And I'll take the view and I'll just copy this, delete the upload part of it, and we can leave that there. And then we can just call cancel upload. Excellent. So I'll rerun that test, make sure it passes. Excellent. Now, before we move further, a couple of notes on why I'm doing this. I like to extract these functions to make the test very clear and readable for future coworkers. This is also expressing intent a lot more. And I could have left, for example, the code here because it's not extremely verbose, but at the same time, this is at a different level of abstraction than this. And so I like to keep it all at the same level of abstraction and go ahead and include this as a helper function. Okay, perfect. So now that we've done this, I'm going to go ahead and refactor this one as well. Delete to upload, and I'll rerun the whole test file. Both tests should be passing. Excellent. Now that we've done this, let's go ahead and test that a user can see an error when uploading too many files. Go ahead and copy the previous test. And the way to test this should now be fairly straightforward. If 3 files is too many files, we can go ahead and upload the same file 3 times. And we should be able to see in the HTML that we have that too many files text. Now, this upload isn't returning an HTML. If you remember, the function here we've defined is returning the view. And so now we have to go ahead and render the view here to get some HTML. And we say too many files. Once again, we could use the has element helper here, but in this case, I'm actually okay just asserting against the HTML that's returned, because in this case, this too many files will not be present on the page in any other way. So I'll go ahead and run this test. Excellent, it passes. And we can go back to the index and delete the errors and make sure that our test is actually asserting something valuable. And in this case, if we remove that code, we don't have that too many files in the HTML, so I'll go ahead and put it back and rerun that test. Excellent. Now at this point, you might think we've covered testing uploads and their image previews pretty well. But there's one thing that this render upload is not doing for us, and that's testing that we have a validate event, a Phoenix change validate on the form. If you look at the uploads documentation, you'll notice that in order to define the uploads, we need to have a Phoenix change and a Phoenix submit defined on the form. That Phoenix change validate event is triggered whenever we upload those images. In our case, our tests are not covering that. Let's go ahead and test that out. I'll go ahead and comment this out and rerun those tests. Go back to index. And there you go. We have 3 tests, 0 failures. So as you can see, this isn't being validated. But if you go to the UI, and now that we've commented out this piece of code, and I go ahead and browse and try to upload a couple of images, you'll notice that this is this is constantly failing. And if you look at your logs, you'll see that we have a lot of errors. I'll actually go ahead and take a look at them so you can see. We keep getting these errors because there's no handle event callback. So I'll go ahead and put this back. Now, how can we test that we have this validate event? Well, one way we can do this is to test the form validation in its normal way. Let's go ahead and do that. So for example, we can say here that user sees an error when creating new album without name, right? We'll go ahead and grab this. We don't really need this. We can target the form, and this is the upload form. And we'll go ahead and call it render change here. And now we should see, and pardon me, the form should have an album with a name of nil. And we can render that change. And now we should be able to see that there's some tag that says can't be blank. Let's go ahead and run this test. Excellent, it passes. Now let's go ahead and go back to the index and remove the handle event. And our test should now fail. Excellent. So this is one way to test this. And this works because our form is not just about uploading images. We also have the name. And so we're testing that this validate event is present through the name. But what if we had a form that only has uploads? How would we go ahead and test that? One way we could do that is to go ahead and do a dummy render change on that form in this upload helper. So for example, we could go ahead and call here the form and not pass any data, but just call render change. And what we're doing here is we're ensuring that we have that validate handle event, and it's all encapsulated in this upload helper function. So now if I run the first test, it'll pass. And if I go to index and I remove the validate event, it'll fail. Excellent. So it's a little unexpected, but Phoenix LiveViewTest helpers don't automatically test the Phoenix change validate attribute. If we're submitting the form, as well we'll see, we'll be testing the save part, but this validate, this Phoenix change, is not automatically captured. And so our production code could be broken when our tests tell us that everything is fine. And so there's two ways to handle this. One is to test this validate directly if you have a form that has other fields like name, and so we validated name before. And the other way to test it is like we did right now, where we include in at least one test where we're testing the upload that we can trigger a render change on the form. It's not the cleanest way to do this, but it is something that gives us a guarantee and assurance that the validate handle event callback is defined. All right, I think that's good for this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at how we submit this and save those files for the direct-to-server approach. I'll see you there.